Hello, my loyal subjects, and welcome! Today we're going to be using a program that I love quite a lot, which is Substance Designer, and yeah, we're going to be making some stone bricks because I feel like doing some practice, and I also feel like showing it off, so I'm just going to go here, I'm going to create a new graph, which you can do up here at the button or whatever. Anyway, we're going to create a new graph, and I'm going to call it stone brick. We'll call this industrial stone brick. I'm gonna kind of aim for a, I don't know, I'm kind of imagining like a Victorian era thing. I have no idea. Maybe Victorian era, maybe kind of a industrial warehouse kind of brick wall thing. Lots of mortar and grout. So, anyway, let's try that out. Also just got ketchup on my hand. Anyway, so, excuse me. So I'm just going to throw down a node that has all the outputs I want. So base material, right click, create output nodes, no hidden connectors. Yeah, I'll use this for previewing. Go down here, expose the height, make sure it's using the whole height range, and we can start off. Height range is just basically how much of the image it takes up. In this case I want it to use the entire range of the image to do it. So completely dark to completely white. Should be relatively easy. We can test this out by throwing in like a clouds image, for example. We also need to preview it by dragging this down. So you can see here, we get kind of bumpy, some bumpy surface detail. I'm also going to up this to 1K by 1K so that we can get our lovely little 1K by 1K image. And then we can go over here and we can play with things. So want the normal intensity to be quite a bit stronger because we're going to be previewing. And yeah, let's start off with a brick pattern. So brick, I'm going to use the brick generator. There are also the built-in patterns you can use, but I'm going to use brick generator because it gives me a little bit more control. And plus I just like it a little bit more. So this will start us off. So as you can see here, we get ourselves a lovely pattern. I am actually going to build this with no parallax mapping. If you're not aware what I mean by that, you go to Materials, Edit, Default Edit, rather, and you have this parallax height thing, which will actually perform parallax occlusion mapping. But because I want to build this kind of for an engine or a game that won't actually be using it, I'm not actually going to have parallax occlusion mapping on. This will encourage me to work for finer detail and not get so dependent on parallax occlusion mapping as a technique. So I'm trying to practice being less dependent on it, because it is such a cool technique, but when you make textures that only look good with it, it sort of becomes a problem when you want games that run quickly. So anyway, as a result, because parallax occlusion mapping is just ludicrously expensive, we have no real good displacement options, sadly. So there we are. Here's our basic brick pattern. You can see it looks all gorgeous and everything, but I kind of want it to be a little bit torn up. You know, I kind of want this to look a little bit torn up. But actually, I might make some paving stones. It might be nice to make kind of a medieval, or maybe not medieval, maybe Victorian pavement. So, yeah, let's just stick to, you know, I might actually just delete height for the sake of it. Just delete height completely so that I am not tempted to use it. The temptation maybe is too strong. Anyway. So here's our base material, and I want to damage it up a little bit, so I'm going to use a slope blur. Slope blur is super awesome. It'll basically take the gradient of whatever image you're using and use that to blur it directionally, and it has some really cool options. So for example, to show this off, if I go Perlin Noise, I'm going to use Perlin Noise. No, I'll use Perlin Noise 1. So if I plug this in, you can see it blurring based on this image. So as you can see, it looks a little bit weird right now, though, again, with anything like this, remember your combinations. Remember what you get out of something, because this is kind of cool looking. You know, this is kind of cool looking. I like this. This could be, you know, we could just take this right now and say, you know, this very, very simple thing, it's very unique to Substance Designer. Like, this is the kind of stuff you would not see elsewhere. So, for example, I might do something like this, or something a little bit more. Have a couple more layers to it. I don't know, 8's kind of perfect. So, for example, if I took this, and it's like, okay, this is some weird abstract tiles that you put in some rich person's house. You know, this is like their pool tile or whatever. Think about it, it's perfectly seamless. It's really awesome looking, and we could tile it. So, again, learn to improvise and to grab things that look cool. So, this is kind of a cool thing, so I'm just going to right-click, create graph from selection, and I'm going to call this one abstract tiles. Now, when you right-click and you create a graph from selection, it will not replace those nodes, which, again, has its upsides and its downsides, but one of the other downsides is that the graph they kind of give you is a little bit bare bones. So I'm going to create output nodes for this, so we can now put that out. And the other thing is I'm going to switch it to relative to parent, because otherwise it'll just be 512 by 512 all the time, pixel-wise, which is not very detailed. And now we have a node for it. And, yeah, there we are. There's our lovely node. However, let's go back and go back to our brick generator. And I'm just going to, now I'm going to try to actually make my bricks. But remember, always grab things that look cool. It's like, oh, hey, you found something that looks awesome? Grab it, keep it, and play with it. You found something that's useful, add it to your library, and next time you need some weird abstract tiles, use it. If you need some control, crack it open and modify it, etc. So let's throw down our slope blur, and this time let's get less sidetracked. So slope blur, not slope blur, I want Perlin noise. So now if I plug this in, and we can increase the samples a little bit, decrease the intensity, you can see we get kind of a worn out looking map, but still kind of limited, doesn't look super amazing yet. And there are a couple different modes we can choose. We can choose minimum, which will only chip away at our bricks. This gives us a nice kind of worn out look. You can also go to maximum, which will actually fill in the grout. This is kind of useful for if you want to actually build up something in the crevices. In this case, we're going to choose minimum because, frankly, I want to wear away the surface. Now, you can see it's a little bit blobby and kind of basic, so I want to choose something with a little bit more noise in it. So let's go to clouds too. This is one of my favorite little maps. And if I just go in here and plug this in here, you can see height is super important, by the way. Like, if you have good height information, you can pretty much extrapolate everything else from it. Like your base color, it's really easy to get a lot of adaptive base color because you can like grab the crevices and everything will look nicely held together. This is the reason why a lot of people end up sculpting textures and stuff like ZBrush, because you end up sculpting it and you end up having a nice base for all your other stuff. You can paint in the crevices and make it look like it's actually, you know, the coloration is not random, it's actually adapting to the underlying surface. So anyway, and with Substance Designer we can do the exact same thing. Matter of fact, I would recommend looking up like ZBrush texturing tutorials for sculpting textures, and you know, look at how they do it and see if you can do it in Substance Designer with some of the cool techniques. So as you can see, clouds makes a pretty good stone right off the bat. If I go in here and I plug this into our slope blur, we can get an even weirder look, because you can see this just chisels the living shit out of our bricks. Creates these nice damages and everything. This looks gorgeous. Look at that. However, it's super exaggerated damage. Like, we're lacking any large-scale damage. It's like someone just went in and chiseled the living crap out of the corners here without ever, you know, without actually aiming for anything else. So I'm also going to quickly stop this from being a metal real quick, because that's distracting as hell. But you can see here, it's quite a large, kind of chiseled piece of damage. And I'm just going to go in here, drop the intensity a little bit. And you can see while this works, and this might be good for certain scenarios, I personally don't want it here. We can, of course, dial it back a little bit and get more of a fine edge chiseling if we want. But we can also, if you want, we can blend between. Because I kind of like the large sweeping shapes of this Perlin noise, you know, where it sort of sweeps these large forms into it. You know, we get these large chiseled areas and gradients and everything. But I also happen to like the clouds, so I'm just going to blend between them. And I'm actually going to make the clouds an overlay. So if I go into overlay, no, not screen, overlay. You can see this will kind of combine them in a cool way. I won't go into blending modes quite yet, but yeah, you can see here just lovely, lovely little damage and texture and everything like that. I'm going to drop the intensity a little bit because remember we're trying to make something that just shows up as a normal map. So there, we've got ourselves a little bit of fine detail. Some nice fine detail that can catch on the light and looks kind of nice. So, anyway, there we are. So there's our kind of first step, right? And obviously if we wanted to have parallax mapping, we totally could. So, matter of fact, it would look quite nice. But again, I'm trying to stick to a normal map here, because it's good practice. So, anyway, this is all fine and dandy, but we kind of need something that's going to break up this sort of smooth, perfectly smooth look. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do BNW spots 1, and if I just plug this in, this is a little trick I found for adding detail like this, is I kind of want it to look pockmarked, like it's just been hit by little pebbles, and it's been rained on, and like just hit by stuff and kind of pummeled, and still smooth, but sort of has received damage and had it polished away so many times, just got tiny little imperfections in it. So anyway, as you can see, this kind of creates a bunch of pinpoints, and if we invert it, by inverting grayscale, you can see we can actually get like a kind of a cool, you know, sort of big little, almost little dimples in the surface kind of look. Looks quite nice, really strong in this case, because our normal is quite strong. So I'm just going to blend it over our original here. And I'm just going to multiply them together for now. And you can see, as I pull back the opacity, we can get these little pockmarks into our surface. And that looks quite nice. I'm going to make it really subtle. Now I kind of want to adjust how strong it is. I want to have certain areas where it's stronger, certain areas where it's weaker, and as a result, I'm going to start by dialing in. I need to generate a mask, basically. I want to generate a black and white image for how strong it is at certain points. So I'm going to use a node by the name of ambient occlusion. Actually, I don't think I need to, because I've already got the crevices here. So anyway, I'm just going to use this height, actually. So in this case, I'm going to use slope blur. As you can see, slope blur is a little bit expensive, but really powerful. In this case, I just want to expand this out into some large, dirty gradient. So I'll just use the same map, and I'll up the samples a little bit. But as you can see, this will create some nice kind of extensions of those crevices. And I'm going to switch to minimum so that we can sort of create some large forms. Some areas where it's strong, some areas where it's weak. In this case, I want it in the crevices, that kind of damage to be weak, and around the crevices. And then other areas, and we could even look at this as an actual height for a second, and you can see that looks quite nice. And now we can actually go in and use this as our opacity, except it's kind of the inverse of what we want. This is saying in the crevices we have less of this thing, whereas the rest of it, it has a lot of the thing. You know, in this case, these kind of pockmarks. So I'm just going to invert. And you can see already we're kind of getting those pockmarks in certain areas. Now, there is kind of a weakness to this right now, which is that it's going from nothing to completely strong. I'm not, you know, not a problem to have the completely strong part, it's that I don't want it to fade away to nothing necessarily. So, anyway, I could go in here and add a levels node, which is nice, but it's also by hand. I could also go in here and use a range node, histogram range. The histogram nodes are incredibly powerful. I want to use the whole range, but I want to push it a little bit in the light direction. So there's a little bit of it left over. So it's about, you know, just leave it about there. So pushing a little bit of gray in there. So as you can see, already we're starting to get some very interesting detail. We're getting a lot of the damage concentrated around the edges, and not much concentrated around the main body. And you can already see we're getting some nice interest. I can make it a little bit more subtle, and we can start to get it as just kind of a lighting imperfection, which is exactly what I want it as. So there we are. There is our glorious fine detail. Now I want to add a little bit more to that. So I want to add like some larger scale crevices and damage and scratches in the surface and areas where it looks like it just got hit by a rock. So I'm just going to give myself a little bit more clearance with this height map. And before I go on to, I'm just going to put this in the area before I get to all the fine detail and everything. I actually want to go in and do a little bit of early damage to the surface. Very early, large forms. Once again, slope blur comes to the rescue. Needless to say, I overused the living shit out of this node. And let's use another one of the histogram nodes. This time we'll use histogram scan. What this one will do is it'll actually increase the contrast of your image and allow you to basically grab a certain part. Like I only want to see the dark parts, or I want to only see the light parts, or whatever. Gives you a lot of freedom. So I'm just going to plug this in here. And you can see here I can kind of adjust where the slope is. Obviously lots of samples and not much intensity. And as you can see, we kind of get these kind of larger scale crevices and damage. I can make them less frequent, only showing up in a couple of areas. And I get a lot of kind of freedom on where it's actually concentrated. Plus, I can also say how strong it is once it's actually there. You can, of course, make it a minimum operation, where it'll only chisel away. You can make it maximum, where it'll actually fill in, which can also be quite useful. And, of course, blur, which is just a mix of both. So, I think this will work. This will work for us, and, yeah. I like it. So, there we are. There we're starting to build up some nice height information. Now, if I wanted to show it as, for example, if I wanted to show it off as a full parallaxed material, I can just make sure I've got all my outputs that I need. Make sure I'm previewing that material, and just increase the scale a little bit, and you can actually see we get ourselves some nice depth to our surface. Again, I'm going to turn this off because I actually want to make a material that looks good without it. So anyway, just because it's a bit of a performance hog for a lot of games and so on, it's good to practice without it as well as with it. But you're only going to be able to use it if your game is very, very high caliber and has very, very small scenes. So anyway, just tweak your settings a little bit. Gives you kind of a little bit of a play session. It's always good to iterate and play with your settings a little bit. So let's add a little bit more. I want to kind of, this is a decent height map, but I kind of want to add a little bit more interest. I feel like adding some actual cracks. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to say cells. I'm going to add cells 3, which is sort of this crevice-y looking, sort of craggy looking style. I'm going to make it distance of 1. So we get these kind of large scale cells. One of the downsides to them, of course, is that they're very faint. So I'm going to use histogram scan to increase the contrast a little bit. I'm going to just pull that down until we get like a really sharp contrast. And then I'm just going to slope blur grayscale once again to my rescue, in this case minimum. And let's just do, maybe not clouds, maybe Perlin, the sort of Perlin mix. As you can see, we can create some really nice large form details, sort of gradients inward. And then we can go in and we can scan it again if we want. Creating more in-depth crevices, and you can get some nice gradients and shape. I could, of course, preview this as height, just to see what this looks like. Looks kind of nice, actually. I like it. So, anyway, this is what I want my cracks to look like. This is kind of what I want to inject into the mix here. So, in order to do that, I'm going to also make these cracks a little bit less uniform and mathematical looking, because right now they are very straight lines and so on. I actually want to, I'm going to use a directional warp. Once again, I'm going to snag the clouds image. Since we're already generating it, it seems like a shame to just, I don't know, generate new ones all the time. So I'm just going to set up my directional warp, set it to like 512. And, well, maybe not 512. I'm just previewing, like, the end result at the far end. Maybe I'll try out my, maybe I'll try out the smoothed version. Yeah, it looks a little better. Okay. So I'm sort of doing the version that we already mixed with the Perlin noise. So there we are. And that creates a more interesting profile for us. And now we can actually go in and we can mix it in with our bricks. So, just going to select that connection, blend. Make sure to blend the cracks over the bricks, and you can see them showing up already. And I can go in here and I can choose minimum for darken. And we can add ourselves some lovely crevices. Might degrade the directional warp a little bit to something a little bit more tame, because that's a bit overkill. And the other thing I might do is make this a little bit less gung-ho on the darkening front, but either way we get a lot of freedom to create these kind of crevices. The other problem is all these bricks are of even height, so even though I'm doing the minimum operation, it might as well be doing like it basically might as well be doing a multiply for all intents and purposes. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to up the slope a little bit to add some slope to the bricks, and you'll notice something weird happen once it actually updates, which is that it'll sort of break up the crevices. Because we're using minimum, it'll actually make certain bricks receive less of them than others. Plus, if we add some variation, it'll help break it up even more. You can see our cracks aren't completely continuous now, they're actually quite nice and sort of broken up. So anyway, there we are. And yeah, that's looking quite nice. Might up the intensity a little bit. So as you can see here, yeah, I might use the cloud's directional warp because, yeah, it looks a little better. I like that. Okay. So anyway, you'll kind of find what you like and what you don't like and what you want to focus on. But you'll kind of find your own techniques. And in this case, I'm just doing this, because that looks nice. So I'm just going to dial back the opacity a little bit so the cracks are a little bit shallower. Wait for it to update and so on. Let's make these cracks a little bit shallower. And there we are. There's our gorgeous height. So, as you can see, you can just keep adding layers of detail over it and over it. You can add, like, okay, I want it to be, you know, I want on the edges, I want to add a little bit more wear or whatever. You kind of get to choose what you actually want to focus on. You can go in here, you could say, like, tile random, for example, and you could use this. Tile random's super cool. Lets you actually generate, well, random tiles. So, you know, more randomly distributed tiles, and then you can go in here, you can go into shape, and all this kind of stuff. There's all these cool options. It's just a matter of playing around, right? It's just a matter of dicking around, finding what you want to work with, finding what you don't want to work with, and avoiding it. And, you know, finding what works and what doesn't, and finding techniques. Remember, we've still got our abstract tiles that we came up with early on, and now we have something that'll add damage. It's just a matter of saving all these and making sure to find the ones you like and reuse them and build up your library. So, building up your library in Substance Designer is very important, and making sure that you have a big library of nodes. So getting used to the idea of extracting parts of your graph and making nodes out of them. Like, notice we're just taking this kind of brick pattern here, and we're just damaging the living crap out of it. It's a very specific brick pattern, but we're just damaging the crap out of it. So we could actually go in, and even though it's kind of tailored for these bricks, I could just expose all the brick settings, which you can just go up to instance parameters and expose parameters, and it'll give you an option to expose just everything. I could just say all. And now I could expose it. One of the other things I could do is I go over here, select my entire height, create graph from selection, industrial stone brick, industrial stone brick height. And now if I jump over here, you can see we've got ourselves some lovely industrial brick height. Create the output, switch it to relative to parent, and there we are. So anyway, right there we've created ourselves a lovely node that does all of this work for us. It does all of this work for us, we can randomize it, all of the things, and this gives us a nice base to work from. And now, whenever I want some bricks with some randomization or some damage, I can go in here and here's a new type of brick. So, and we can obviously go into industrial stone brick, select the brick generator, and just expose parameters. All of them. There. Now they are all exposed, and we can now go over to our industrial stone brick and adjust our various settings. So I could say, like, okay, well, I want more bricks along the x-axis than the y-axis. And there we have it. Look at that. Look at that gorgeousness. I could say I want 2 by 2. I want big blocks of brick. I just want big tiles. And there we are. So anyway, it gives you a lot of freedom, and also will give us a good base to draw all of our other information from. So hopefully this has been informative, and yeah, peace out, Cthulhu Ftaken, and good luck.